Welcome to Long Listen, where we slow down and sit with the ideas that most people rush past. This channel is about more than summaries. It's about breaking down powerful books, questioning their assumptions, and exploring what they really mean for our lives today. Back when I was 22, I grabbed 12 Rules for Life off the shelf. I wasn't hunting for deep wisdom or some grand life philosophy. I was just desperate for anything to shut down that nagging voice saying I was already way behind everyone else. I was drowning in deadlines, scrolling Instagram at 1 a.m., watching other people look like they had their lives figured out while I barely kept mine together. I didn't open the book looking for enlightenment. I just wanted relief. Something, anything, that would quiet the sense that I was already losing a race I didn't remember signing up for. And then, a few pages in, it felt less like being comforted and more like being shaken awake. Not gently, more like a blunt, well-aimed slap. That's the first thing worth saying about Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. This is not a book that tries to make you feel good about yourself. It doesn't whisper affirmations or tell you that you're perfect just the way you are. Instead, it asks a tougher question. What if the chaos in your life isn't just the system, your parents, capitalism, or bad luck? What if a big part of it is you dodging responsibility? For a lot of young readers, that idea hits hard. We live in a culture that constantly tells us to protect our comfort, curate our identity, and avoid anything that feels heavy or demanding. Peterson cuts straight through that. He doesn't deny that the world is unfair or complex, but he insists on something uncomfortable. Before you try to fix the world, clean up your own corner of it. What makes this book even more interesting is the cultural tension around its author. Jordan Peterson has been canceled, criticized, and debated relentlessly, especially over gender and politics. Yet 12 Rules for Life has sold over 10 million copies worldwide. That gap is striking. If so many people publicly reject him, why do millions still read him? If the tone is strict, demanding, sometimes even harsh, why does it resonate in an era that claims to resist authority? I think the answer has less to do with ideology and more to do with timing. We're living in an age of infinite choices and constant comparison. We can be anyone, do anything, go anywhere, but that freedom often mutates into paralysis. When every path is open, none of them feel certain. When everyone else's highlight reel is visible 24/7, your own ordinary struggle feels like failure. Peterson steps into that confusion and says something simple but unsettling. Order matters. Structure matters. Discipline matters. And whether you like it or not, your life is something you are responsible for carrying. That message doesn't feel warm. It doesn't feel soothing, but it feels solid. Like being handed a weight and realizing, for the first time, that maybe you're stronger than you thought. And that strength doesn't come from escaping responsibility, but from accepting it. The core of 12 Rules for Life is built around one idea that sounds abstract, until it collides with your actual life: the constant tension between order and chaos. Peterson doesn't treat these as distant philosophical concepts. He frames them as forces you're already wrestling with, whether you're aware of it or not. Order is structure, routine, stability, predictability. Chaos is uncertainty, disruption, heartbreak, failure. The unexpected message that changes everything. Especially in your 20s, life feels like a non-stop tug-of-war between the two. Think of it like a survival game. Order is the routine you build before entering the arena. You know your loadout, your strategy, your timing. Chaos is the random encounter, the shrinking zone, the ambush you didn't anticipate. Without some structure, you don't last long. But cling too tightly to one safe position, and you still lose. Peterson's point is straightforward. Build enough order to survive chaos, and enough courage to face it, so your life doesn't shrink into something small and defensive. For Gen Z, chaos isn't a dramatic mythological dragon. It's job hopping that doesn't lead anywhere. It's a relationship that dissolves without explanation. It's looking up at 3 a.m. and realizing you've been scrolling for hours and somehow feel worse than before. Chaos is when your plans stop working and the future turns blurry. And the instinct most of us have is avoidance. We distract ourselves. We numb out. We tell ourselves things will sort themselves out eventually. Peterson challenges that directly. Ignore chaos and it doesn't disappear. It grows quietly until it hits harder. This is where many people misunderstand him and dismiss him as outdated or boomer energy. They hear words like discipline, hierarchy, responsibility, and assume it's just another lecture about toughness. But that misses the strategic layer. He's not moralizing, he's warning. It's less be perfect and more, if you don't level up, the next challenge will overwhelm you. The tone may feel strict, but underneath it is realism. Life is difficult, and pretending otherwise doesn't make it easier. One of the sharpest moves Peterson makes is reframing responsibility. In a culture that prioritizes comfort and emotional safety, responsibility sounds like an added burden. Why carry more when you're already exhausted? Peterson flips the equation. Responsibility is not what crushes you. It's what gives your suffering meaning. Without it, pain feels random. With it, pain becomes part of a direction. When you choose something to care about deeply, you voluntarily accept weight. And strangely, that weight can make you stand taller. This hits a nerve for many young people who feel lost rather than lazy. The struggle often isn't an opportunity, it's direction. The internet offers infinite options, careers, identities, lifestyles. You can pivot endlessly. But endless possibilities often produce anxiety, not freedom. Peterson doesn't argue against freedom. He argues that freedom without structure turns into chaos. Order, in this sense, is not rigidity. It's choosing a few things to take seriously so the rest of life doesn't drown you. Take the infamous clean your room rule. It's been mocked into a meme. But as a symbol, it's powerful. It's not about interior design. It's about proof. Proof that you can impose order on a small part of your environment. When your space is chaotic, your mind often mirrors it. When you fix something small, even slightly, you experience a shift. You are not entirely at the mercy of the world. You can act. You can improve conditions. That psychological shift matters more than the tidy desk. For Gen Z, that principle might look different. Maybe it's organizing your finances instead of avoiding your banking app. Maybe it's setting boundaries with someone who drains you. Maybe it's committing to a basic sleep schedule instead of glamorizing burnout. These actions won't trend online. They won't transform your life overnight. But they build capacity. And capacity is what allows you to handle chaos without collapsing. At the same time, Peterson warns against becoming trapped in excessive order. A life over-engineered for safety becomes sterile. Growth requires stepping into uncertainty voluntarily, changing careers, creating something publicly, saying what you actually think. Chaos is not the enemy, it's the arena of development. But the key word is voluntary. When you choose to confront chaos, you grow. When chaos ambushes you while you're unprepared, it destabilizes you. This balance matters deeply in an era obsessed with reinvention. We're told we can be anything, but rarely taught how to become something. Peterson's framework fills that gap. Before chasing transformation, build stability. Before confronting the world, strengthen yourself. Otherwise, ambition collapses under its own weight. Strip away the politics and controversy, and the message becomes clearer. Life is unpredictable, unfair, sometimes brutal, but you are not powerless within it. Take responsibility for what you can control, and you increase your capacity to face what you cannot. Seen this way, Peterson isn't scolding from a distance. He feels more like a demanding coach who refuses to sugarcoat the difficulty of the game. He doesn't promise comfort. He promises strength. And for a generation navigating relentless uncertainty, that promise, however uncomfortable, continues to resonate. Rule 1 is often reduced to a meme-level punchline. Clean your room. For many young people, that phrase alone is enough to trigger an eye roll. It sounds small, obvious, almost patronizing, like being told to drink more water or go to bed earlier. But that reaction is precisely why the rule matters. Peterson isn't obsessed with spotless desks or perfectly folded clothes. He's pointing at something deeper. Your relationship with order, and whether you're willing to create it when no one is forcing you to. When life feels out of control, the instinct is usually external. The job market is broken, the system is rigged, algorithms are toxic, and some of that is true. But Peterson's argument becomes uncomfortable because it redirects attention inward. Before condemning the world, before declaring everything hopeless, ask something smaller and sharper. Is there a corner of my life I've let drift into chaos because it's easier not to deal with it? That corner might be your room, but for Gen Z, it's often something else entirely. Think about your digital room. Your phone is likely the first thing you touch in the morning and the last thing you see at night. If your physical space reflects your inner state, your digital environment amplifies it. Endless notifications, accounts that quietly erode your confidence, apps engineered to hijack your attention. This is chaos scaled to algorithmic intensity. You wouldn't let strangers walk into your bedroom and shout opinions at you all day? Yet that's effectively what happens when you don't curate your digital space. In 2026, cleaning your room might mean unfollowing accounts that trigger comparison, muting draining conversations, or deleting the one app you open automatically whenever discomfort appears. This is where Rule 1 becomes less symbolic and more strategic. Order isn't about aesthetic minimalism. It's about reclaiming control. For some, that starts with finances. Downloading an app like YNAB or simply reviewing your bank transactions can feel confronting. The avoidance often feels safer than the numbers. But when you look directly at reality, something shifts. The anxiety stops being abstract. You might not like the data, but at least it's concrete. Order turns vague fear into specific problems you can address. Peterson emphasizes the psychological effect of order. When you organize a space, correct your posture, or systematize something neglected, your brain registers a signal. I can act. I can influence outcomes. That signal matters more than fleeting motivation. Motivation is emotional. Agency is structural. In a culture saturated with manifestation language and passive hope, Rule 1 is grounded. It doesn't demand belief, it demands action. There's also an ethical layer that often goes unnoticed. Disorder doesn't just affect you. When you're chronically late, financially reckless, or emotionally chaotic, someone else absorbs the cost. A roommate compensates. A partner carries tension. Your future self inherits consequences. Imposing order on your life is not vanity. It's respect. For Gen Z, it can be helpful to reframe this rule less as morality and more as optimization. Think of life as a role-playing game. You don't defeat high-level challenges by rushing in underprepared. You manage inventory. You discard what drains energy. You reinforce what strengthens you. Rule 1 is inventory management. When your mental, digital, and physical systems are cluttered, every challenge consumes more stamina than necessary. Of course, this principle has boundaries. Cleaning your room won't cure depression or dismantle systemic inequality. Peterson himself acknowledges that suffering is inevitable, but he argues that unnecessary chaos compounds inevitable pain. There's a distinction between suffering you cannot control and suffering created by neglect. Rule 1 is about eliminating avoidable chaos so you can conserve strength for unavoidable hardship. What makes this rule powerful is its scalability. You don't need to transform your entire life. You choose one neglected domain and impose structure. Maybe it's sleep consistency. Maybe it's your inbox. Maybe it's the digital noise you tolerate daily. When you create even a small pocket of order, you establish stability. That stability becomes a base. And in a world defined by volatility, even a small base of order can change how you stand. Seen this way, Rule 1 isn't about obedience or moral superiority, it's about preparation. Life will introduce chaos whether you consent or not. Cleaning your room, physical or digital, is a signal to yourself. I am not entirely helpless. It's small, but it's serious. For a generation navigating constant noise, pressure, and comparison, building order deliberately is quietly radical. Rule 2 is where 12 rules for life begins to collide with modern self-love culture. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. Sounds harmless at first. But underneath that sentence is a sharp implication. It challenges the dominant message that you are already complete as you are. Peterson's stance isn't cruel, but it is direct. You may have inherent worth, but you are not a finished product. And pretending you are doesn't move you forward. This is why he's often labeled harsh or outdated. In an era built around validation, his refusal to soothe can feel abrasive. But consider the environment Gen Z inhabits: filtered lives, curated routines, algorithmic success stories. Comparison isn't optional anymore. It's ambient. Affirmations alone don't neutralize that pressure. The real question becomes, which comparisons corrode you and which ones strengthen you? Rule 2 draws that boundary clearly. Comparing yourself to others is structurally unfair. You measure your unfiltered reality against someone else's edited highlights. If you lose, you feel inferior. If you win, you feel anxious about maintaining the lead. Either way, growth stalls. Peterson argues that this external comparison cultivates resentment and paralysis. It keeps you reactive. It ties your sense of worth to metrics you don't control. Comparing yourself to your past self changes the game entirely. It shifts the metric from status to trajectory. If yesterday you avoided something difficult and today you confronted it, that counts. If last month you spent recklessly and this month you exercised restraint, that counts. The progress might be invisible to everyone else, but it is structurally meaningful to you. Improvement becomes personal, not performative. In a Gen Z context, that's subversive. Social platforms incentivize identity construction, crafting a version of yourself optimized for external approval. Peterson redirects attention to internal development. The goal isn't to outperform everyone, it's to reduce self-sabotage incrementally. That subtle shift moves the focus from ego to competence. However, Rule 2 carries a demand: honesty. If you compare yourself to yesterday and there's no improvement, you can't outsource the blame. That discomfort is the point. When the benchmark is internal, failure isn't humiliation, it's feedback. It reveals where adjustment is necessary. Internal standards create accountability without spectacle. Critics argue that this mindset risks becoming obsessive, particularly for people already managing anxiety. That concern isn't baseless. Self-measurement without compassion can devolve into self-surveillance. But properly understood, Rule 2 isn't about relentless optimization. It's about direction. It's about incremental correction. Improvement doesn't require dramatic transformation. Sometimes it's sending the email you've postponed, reducing a habit slightly, or responding to stress more constructively than you did before. The distinction matters. Comparison to others destabilizes identity. Comparison to your past stabilizes it. One produces envy, the other produces agency. In an economy of constant visibility, choosing a private metric of progress is strategic. It reduces volatility in self-worth. It grounds growth in reality rather than performance. And over time, small directional changes compound. That's the deeper logic behind Rule 2. Not superiority, no shame. Just a quiet recalibration of where your standards come from and who they're really for. What makes Rule 2 so effective is that it restores agency in an environment that feels structurally overwhelming. You may not be able to repair the economy, rewire social media algorithms, or eliminate inequality. But you can become marginally more disciplined, more precise, more competent than you were yesterday. Over time, those marginal gains compound, not dramatically, not publicly, but structurally. Trajectory, not spectacle, determines long-term outcomes. In that sense, Rule 2 repositions you as the central agent in your own narrative, not in the performative main character sense, but in the strategic sense. You are no longer competing with strangers online. You are engaged in a longitudinal project with yourself. And like any durable relationship, it improves through consistency, not theatrics. When Peterson questions the phrase, "you are enough," he is not attacking your intrinsic value. He is challenging stagnation. Self-respect includes the willingness to evolve. For Gen Z, this may be the quiet power move, not signaling progress publicly, not optimizing for validation, but waking up and asking, what is one measurable improvement I can execute today? In a culture saturated with comparison, selecting your own metric is an act of autonomy. Rule 3 pushes the framework into even more uncomfortable territory. Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. At first glance, it reads as basic morality. Don't deceive. Be honest. But Peterson is not primarily addressing dramatic betrayals. He's focused on subtle, normalized distortions, especially self-deception. For many young people, dishonesty is internal rather than external. Convincing yourself you're satisfied with work that drains you. Minimizing red flags in relationships because change feels disruptive. Romanticizing burnout as ambition. These aren't theatrical lies. They're coping mechanisms. They allow short-term stability. But Peterson's argument is functional, not moralistic. Distortion of truth accumulates system instability. This is where Rule 3 directly confronts hustle culture. Hustle culture valorizes output over reflection. If you're exhausted, push harder. If you're dissatisfied, reframe it as growth. If something feels misaligned, drown it in productivity. Peterson does not reject effort. He rejects effort built on denial. When behavior diverges from internal truth, cognitive dissonance intensifies. Over time, that misalignment manifests as anxiety, irritability, or chronic dissatisfaction. Self-deception degrades decision-making. When you lie to yourself, you must maintain the narrative. That requires ignoring signals, fatigue, resentment, disengagement. Eventually, perception itself becomes unreliable. Peterson's claim is pragmatic. Truth is not an ethical ornament. It is a navigational tool. Without it, your internal map of reality becomes distorted, and distorted maps produce poor strategic decisions. This is particularly relevant in volatile career landscapes. There is a distinction between tolerating short-term discomfort for strategic gain and denying long-term misalignment. Saying, "This role isn't ideal, but it builds transferable skills," reflects awareness. Saying, "This is fine," while accumulating resentment reflects avoidance. The former preserves agency, the latter defers reckoning. Importantly, Peterson does not advocate impulsive disruption. Telling the truth does not require detonating your life overnight. It often begins privately, admitting dissatisfaction, fear, or misalignment internally. That admission destabilizes illusions, but it restores clarity, and clarity enables recalibration. In relationships, the principle is amplified. Sustained misalignment requires sustained deception, minimizing boundaries, downplaying incompatibilities, suppressing concerns. Initially, this feels like conflict avoidance. Over time, it becomes self-betrayal. Peterson's argument is structural. Chronic dishonesty erodes trust, externally and internally. When you repeatedly override your own perception of truth, self-trust deteriorates. The difficult reality is that truth carries a cost. It may require career adjustments, difficult conversations, or strategic exits. Hustle culture implies discomfort can be outworked. Peterson's counterpoint is economic. Deferred truth accrues interest. The longer misalignment persists, the more expensive correction becomes. For Gen Z, raised in environments of optimization, branding, and curated identity, Rule 3 reframes honesty as operational efficiency. Lies consume cognitive bandwidth. They require maintenance. Truth simplifies systems. When internal values, external actions, and stated intentions align, friction decreases. Decision-making improves. Energy is conserved. Viewed this way, Rule 3 is not moral superiority. It is system integrity. A structure built on distortion eventually collapses under accumulated contradictions. A structure built on truth, even imperfect, evolving truth, retains adaptability. In an economy that rewards performance optics, choosing internal honesty is strategically subversive. It may not look impressive, but it produces coherence, and coherence scales. By this point, a fair question naturally emerges. If 12 Rules for Life resonates with so many young people, why does it also trigger such intense backlash? Why does it provoke eye rolls, resistance, even hostility, especially among Gen Z? The answer isn't mysterious. The book functions like the original red pill in The Matrix, not the meme version, but the narrative one. Once you adopt its frame, you cannot easily return to comfortable ambiguity. And that clarity is not soothing, it's destabilizing. The first source of resistance is its collision with modern self-care culture. Much contemporary self-care subtly equates comfort with healing. Binging shows after stress, labeling distraction as me time, lowering expectations to avoid disappointment. Peterson steps into that terrain and makes a sharp distinction. Comfort is not synonymous with care. Sometimes what you need is not rest, but structure. Not validation, but direction. For a generation trained to prioritize emotional safety that can feel accusatory. If relief is the highest good, then responsibility sounds punitive. Peterson challenges that hierarchy. He suggests that short-term comfort can undermine long-term stability, and that idea alone unsettles a culture optimized for immediate soothing. The second reason for pushback is more structural: agency. The book does not deny systemic inequality or cultural instability. It simply refuses to let those realities nullify personal responsibility. That stance can feel severe. Externalizing blame is psychologically protective. It diffuses pressure. Peterson reassigns it. He insists that even in constrained environments, your decisions still influence outcomes. To someone already fatigued or overwhelmed, that repositioning can feel harsh. It's easier to reject the messenger than to shoulder additional responsibility. But the core argument isn't cruelty, it's leverage. Responsibility expands influence. Avoidance contracts it. The third source of friction is tonal. Peterson does not communicate in the softened, therapeutic cadence that dominates contemporary mental health discourse. His delivery is intense, repetitive, sometimes severe. He speaks as though stakes are existential rather than situational. For audiences accustomed to gentleness and affirmation, that intensity can register as aggression. And yet, paradoxically, that tone is precisely what attracts others. When someone feels stuck in low-grade stagnation, scrolling, procrastinating, drifting, excessive gentleness can feel like complicity. A more forceful voice can feel clarifying. Not pleasant, but bracing. This tension explains the polarization. Publicly, many reject the rhetoric. Privately, some engage with it because it offers something scarce: structure. The book does not promise happiness. It promises competence. It does not claim life is fair. It claims you can increase your capacity to withstand it. Most contemporary self-help markets relief. Quick mindset shifts. Emotional regulation hacks. 12 rules for life markets resilience. That distinction matters. Relief is consumable. Resilience requires construction. Tools are heavier than affirmations. They demand participation. In a culture engineered for dopamine optimization, endless feeds, infinite streaming, algorithmic distraction, Peterson's message disrupts the pattern. It interrupts passive consumption with an active demand. What if stagnation is not evidence of brokenness, but of avoided responsibility? That question alone explains both the attraction and the hostility. It challenges a narrative that equates all discomfort with harm and all effort with toxicity. For those unwilling to interrogate that assumption, the book feels regressive. For those ready to confront it, it feels empowering. Beneath the controversy, the core proposition is simple. You are not asked to become flawless. You are asked to become capable. Capability increases optionality. Optionality increases autonomy. If you're unprepared for that demand, the book feels abrasive. If you are even partially prepared, it becomes a framework for building strength in unstable terrain. And strength, unlike comfort, scales over time. By the end of 12 Rules for Life, what lingers isn't a rigid checklist, it's a recalibration. Peterson doesn't leave you believing that life will eventually smooth itself out, or that fairness is waiting around the corner. He leaves you with something heavier and far more practical. Meaning emerges when you voluntarily accept responsibility, especially when avoidance would be easier. For many young readers, this is where the book does its real work. Not in the grand discussions of mythology or hierarchy, but in mundane, daily decisions. Do you admit your job is draining you, or keep pretending it's fine? Do you reduce numbing habits and introduce structure? Do you compare yourself to curated strangers, or to last month's version of yourself? None of these changes transform life overnight. But stacked consistently, they alter trajectory. And trajectory matters more than mood. What differentiates this book from much contemporary self-help is that it does not promise comfort along the way. It implies the opposite. Responsibility is uncomfortable. Imposing order on your environment, physical, digital, emotional, requires confronting neglected domains. But avoidance does not create safety. It erodes capability. And in volatile conditions, capability is protective. This explains why the book continues to attract readers despite controversy. It appeals to people fatigued by equating self-care with escape. It proposes an alternative: self-respect built through competence. Not reinvention, not perfection. Gradual reliability. Becoming someone you can depend on. Self-trust, once established, compounds. And that compounding is what produces durable autonomy. There is a pragmatic way to engage with the book without converting it into dogma. Treat the rules as instruments, not commandments. You do not need all 12. You do not need to agree with every argument. Identify one domain of disorder and introduce incremental structure. One habit. One boundary. One candid conversation. That suffices to initiate change, and this is where the conversation shifts from theory to participation. If you've begun cleaning one room, whether literal, digital, or psychological, articulate it, share it. Not for validation, but for accountability. Most self-improvement content remains consumptive. Rarely does it evolve into a community. Peterson is frequently quoted for severity, but the distilled principle is straightforward. Do not wait for ideal conditions. They will not arrive. Construct stability where you stand. Begin locally. Begin today.